Hi, everybody. My name is Charity Counts. I'm the Executive Director of the Association of Midwest Museums. Thank you for joining us today for our final awards event for this season, the 2023 Best Practices Award virtual event. Before we begin our program, I want to offer a land acknowledgement. In this era of virtual meetings, when digital spaces may substitute our physical sense of place, it's important to redirect our attention to the land we each occupy in this moment and honor the Indigenous people who have called it home. Because I'm located in Indianapolis, Indiana, and that's where AMM's office is, I invite you to join me in acknowledging the Miami, Delaware, Potawatomi, Shawnee, Hui, and Kickapoo communities, their elders both past and present, as well as future generations. Thank you. Okay, we've got a great program for you today. These events, after housekeeping and background on the award itself, we get into a little bit of programming about our award recipients. So I want to kind of give you a little bit of information to help you navigate this event today, and then we'll dive into that awards program. So first of all, some housekeeping notes. You're welcome to have your video on if you choose, but please keep your audio muted until we prompt you to unmute at different points in the program. This event is an opportunity for all of us to celebrate our recipient, but also to learn more about them and their work. We encourage you to react to what you're hearing today. You can use the chat and comment or ask questions there, or you can raise your hand to ask questions out loud when prompted. To raise your hand, you can physically raise your hand, or you can use Zoom's reaction icons to raise your hand there. There will be moments for audible applause. You can also wave and snap your fingers during that time. And even if we can't hear you, we can see your response. You're also welcome to celebrate in the chat. We have an ASL interpreter with us today. Hopefully they're spotlit on the screen for you. If you need to, I can change the settings so you can drag them to where you need on the screen. Just ping me in the chat. For those of you getting to know AMM for the first time through this event, I want to offer a little bit of background on our organization. We were founded in 1927, which makes us one of the very first museum associations in the United States. We serve an 8-state region that includes all kinds of different types of museums and historic sites, art and cultural centers, science centers, zoos, and libraries. We host many virtual programs each year. My favorite is the award series. It's a joy for us to be able to celebrate all of our recipients through these events and bring together their peers, both in the museum community, but also their staff and colleagues, family, and friends for their local community. Finally, I want to acknowledge everyone who's involved in today's program. Joining us from Downers Grove Museum are Felicia Camacho and Michelle Passateri. We also have a special guest in our program today, Gordon, who introduced himself a few minutes ago. You'll get to hear more from them about this project shortly. Okay, I'm going to have us move to the awards portion of the program now. And I want to offer a little bit of background information on this award and why Downers Grove Museum was selected. The Distinguished Career Award recognizes museums and cultural organizations whose innovative projects or community partnerships and collaborations have led to the advancement of best museum practices or the establishment of new practices at their institutions in order to better fulfill their missions. These projects typically result in new knowledge, ideas, or models that can apply to the museum profession at large. This year's recipient is the Downers Grove Museum for rescuing and renovating the 1846 Israel and Avis Blodgett house to serve as an education center for schools and illuminating the city's connections to the Underground Railroad. The project included restoration of the building and the addition of exhibits in the interior. It took 15 years to bring this project to fruition, requiring patience, tenacity, and savvy of museum staff and members of the community. This new addition on their museum campus has resulted in increased visitorship. Our committee was impressed by the museum's successful navigation of disruptions in their process to see this project through over such a long period of time. We have no doubt that others face roadblocks to similar projects and look forward to learning about your process today during the program. Before we get started on the program portion for today's event, I invite everyone here with us today to unmute or use their Zoom reaction icons to join me in a round of applause as we welcome Felicia and Michelle to say a few words. All right, unmute. Let's make some noise. Congratulations. Yay. Felicia, Michelle, I'll pass it to you.
Hey.
Okay. Michelle, do you want to say anything, or are you okay with me going ahead?
You can go ahead.
All right. So again, we'd really love to thank the Association of Midwest Museums for kind of recognizing that dedication and hard work that our community and staff helped to complete in this amazing project. This 1846 move took many, many years and many support from our local community, including our partnership with the Downers Grove Heritage Preservation Corporation. And so we're extremely grateful for that continued support and creating that space that fosters education and learning in our community. This project started with a lot, and we're so excited to be able to get there. Sure if you have anything else, and if Gordon's available. We lost his video. We'd love for.
There he is.
There we go.
I just turned it off for a moment.
Okay. Well, so this preservation movement would not have been possible without the dedication of many members of our community by the formation of that Downers Grove Heritage Preservation Corporation during that initial stage on those efforts to raise money and move the house onto the Downers Grove property. Therefore, I would love to invite Gordon to kind of say a few words about that initial time and about the project as a whole and how he foresaw it.
Well, thank you very much. I'm really glad to be here with you. And the project began quite a number of years before the 15 that were mentioned. We had a scholar of our community's history, Bob Jensen, who for many years would go to the park board or the village and explain that there was this house that didn't look like much, but it was a really important historic house on Randall Street at that time, because that was the house that Israel and Avis Blodgett built when they first moved to Downers Grove. And it used to be where the museum for the Downers Grove Park District is now. The historical museum was built on the same foundation that this house occupied at the end of the 19th century. When the Chicago Fair was coming, the Blodgett family had been very successful. Their sons became judges and other significant officials in the village, and they felt that this little house wasn't sufficient for their guests. So they built a beautiful Victorian house that is now the Downers Grove Museum and moved this onto the back portion of their 200 acres or so. And Bob would go around and tell people who would listen about the importance of this house. And over the years, it had changed hands and been modified for families that lived in it. The last families from whom we bought, or whom the developer who sold the house to us bought it, were Ralph and Maggie Smith. Maggie was a retired teacher, and she used to flag down the buses as they went around with the school children who were on their Downers Grove history tours and say, "Do you want to come in and see a really old house?" And she'd take them down the basement and showed them the hand-hewn timbers that were the joists holding this house up. And at any rate, when she and her husband moved out west, they sold the house to another long-term Downers Grove resident. And she asked Chris Salmon when he bought the house, to make every effort not to see the house torn down, but to see it preserved. So he began to go around to the same groups, the Historical Society, the Park District, the Village Council, and explain that he had this house. He didn't want to tear it down, but he wanted to build on the lot. Who could help him to preserve the house, buy it, move it somewhere? And it turned out nobody who had an organization at that time had the ability or strong enough interest to jump in and help Chris save the house. So we, Charlie Smart and I and several other people formed an organization. We incorporated it, achieved a tax exempt status, charitable status, so we could accept a donation of the house and accept donations throughout the community to support the move and preservation of the house. And then we went around to the same people, the Park District and the Village Council, and explained what we were trying to do. And we were greeted with very helpful responses. The Park District eventually agreed that we could move the house back onto the Park District Museum campus. And the Village Council authorized us to have a benefit concert before Heritage Fest, village-sponsored festival in the June period. And these were very, very helpful. Greg Bedeloff, who was at that time the head of the Downers Grove Economic Development Commission, thought that it would be very good if major businesses like Sara Lee were able to support us. And so he worked out an arrangement for Sara Lee to support this. But it was a very, very widespread effort, and it continued even after we were able to renovate the house sufficiently and donate it to the Park District. Timken Foundation has most recently made a substantial donation to help complete the renovation and exhibits. The state of Illinois came through eventually with the funding. The grant was about 6 or 7 years between the actual payment to us and the time when the grant was made because of financial difficulties that the state had. But the Park District persevered, and we really have a wonderful result now. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Gordon.
Yeah.
And yeah, like, so I wanted to share, I have a PowerPoint here with kind of some of those before and after photos to kind of like showcase like everything we went through and kind of see a little bit of that history as well. So like starting from the beginning, so this is the Israel and Avis Blodgett family. Avis is the lone lady sitting in the middle in front with her 6 surviving sons. And they're actually sitting directly in front of the house, which is awesome, on its original spot. The house wasn't moved till after her death by her youngest son, Charles, who was living with her at the time. He actually inherited that house, and he later decided to move it to build a bigger house that became our original museum building. But it was his house, the second house, where we kind of created our museum from there. Another image up here we have about it is this. This is actually from the DuPage County Atlas from 1874. And it's an image rendering of that same house on its original spot, which is where the big house is now. The house was moved next to it, which I'll show in another picture. This has an idea of where the house was as prominent into Downers Grove. It moved on Randall Avenue. at the time. So this was an older one. You'd see it's been moved higher elevation where they were able to add a porch. There was also an addition added to it onto its left side. That was not original to the house, but you can, and the siding, of course, had been changed. We also have another one. It's been green a little bit later, the house on Randall Avenue as well, with more shrubbery in front of it. And this was the siding and stuff and the color of it when we were working on moving it. The original move back in 2006. In 2000, then, and in that time, we created this plan of how to move it. So if you can see from our site plan, the original spot was approximately here, right here. And we had to basically move it straight back and a little bit over. So we kind of had to move back. We had to kind of cut some of the shrubbery away to move it about 330 feet. So that's where the original move. And we also, because the original foundation was taken by the new museum building, this was the original spot where it was on the campus, we had to build a whole new basement and a whole new kind of foundation for it. But due to the unique foundation of the original house being in such good condition, we wanted to also kind of use those on display, which I'll share in a moment. So this is the house during the phase to kind of get it moved. You can also see it was not in the best condition. The siding wasn't so good, and just getting everything moved, old wood, but it stood the test of time and stood being able to move twice, which is really cool about it. We had to make a couple changes, of course. And here's it moving May 5th, 2008. The house is being moved to its final resting place, which is super cool. We do have a video of this actually at the museum that people can watch of the house actually kind of like moving over, which is super cool. You can see they also took off the extra addition, which was right here. We had to make new walls. They also uncovered this door behind the siding that wasn't originally there. I believe that would have led to their summer kitchen, which is cool, but not originally part of the original plan. They uncovered it when they were removing the siding in the interior when they were gutting the house. So this is what it looks like now, which we're excited to see, a little bit different. And this is actually kind of what it looked like as early as 2010. So in 2010, after they got the house moved in 2018, they did give the house a new roof, new wood plank siding, windows and doors, along with that the house, some of the house's later additions. So it was sitting on kind of on our property like this, unfortunately, for about 10 years, or 9-ish years, where the outside looked great. It was protected. We were excited for it, but the whole inside was gutted, unfortunately. And so, of course, we had to create a plan. This was example of our budget of what it looked like. This includes all of the money that went into kind of saving the house, the original money, as well as our updated money from our grant, as well as that last Timken Foundation grant, including how much the construction costs as well, and how much went into that. So this is kind of the back entrance of the house before, when it was still gutted. And actually, when I first started, this is what I saw when I first arrived. So I started working in the museum in December of 2017. So the house was still gutted. We still didn't have the money released. And when I first got a tour of the house, this is what I walked into. You can see the caution tape around that area because that floor was not stable. It was dangerous to step over there. And so you kind of had to walk around it. And that, because of that dangers, like we weren't really supposed to let anybody in the house, didn't have an occupancy permit. So really we couldn't, I think I've opened the door for people and be like, look inside, but please don't step inside. It's dangerous. Because we couldn't allow people inside, but this is what we were able to do. That new flooring was reclaimed wood. We were able to get that. This is actually, even though it is on the south side, the back side of the house, our main entrance, because we do have an ADA walking ramp to go into the house. We were able to build that to connect so that there was no step. And so we tend to use this back door as our main entrance. So that's where we have our welcome sign, our welcome labels. We also didn't want to do permanent damage to any of the walls because of the original. So that's why you see a lot of, we decided to do those kind of like standalone signs, those long standalone signs for the house, throughout the house. As well as this wall right here is a lath and plaster, horsehair lath and plaster method that we did to remodel so that we can show how the house was built, because a lot of the loft was not in the best condition, so we kind of had to replace a lot of it. So we were able to make this wall as like an education type area where as soon as they walk in, they can see this feature, and we teach everybody about why the wall looks like that, and this is how the walls were made. This is kind of that north entranceway, so where that front door you would see, the normal front door, leads straight into a stairway. This is what it looked like gutted. But we decided we wanted to add a couple of interactive elements to our museum and our building. So we decided to create an interactive panel where we have several different videos. One of them shares directly the history of DuPage County and the Underground Railroad and that connection, one of the reasons for why the house was chosen to be saved, along with that unique architecture of being so old and how it connects back to the family, as well as the Blodgett's oldest son, Henry, wrote an autobiography about his life. And so we share an excerpt from one of his books that shares kind of that story as well, which we're really excited about. We also were able to create a kitchen exhibit. We also, as you can see, this house, we decided, our main house that we used to have was kind of all historic house feel. It looked like you would walk into a house and you'd be living in a house. Well, since we didn't have the same elements, and since we wanted to kind of share multiple stories about the house, the architecture, the family, as well as that Underground Railroad story, we decided we kind of wanted to make it more of a hybrid. So some areas would be more like set up like, hey, this is how the family would have lived. You can have an idea. Other areas like this one kind of are a little bit more open, a little bit more interpretive panels that we placed. But this part is unique. Right here is newspaper that was found in the walls of the house during that gutting process. We were able to determine, based on those little fragments, that it belonged to an abolitionist newspaper called the Western Citizen. And based on this little part right here, this partial date, we were actually able to figure out exactly what issue of that newspaper it was. And then we were able to go to the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library Museum and obtain a copy because they had all of that newspaper on microfilm. So we were really excited to be able to have that. And that is what we have on display right here, is a copy that people can actually read and see, and you can see the stories that are in there as well, which we're really happy to share. As well as our last area on our main floor does set up kind of like that historic house room. This is the one room that we wanted to set up so that you can see this is how this house had been set up. This is how the family would have lived. So this is more of a historic. We have a historic rope bed that the Glen Ellen Historical Society thankfully donated to us. We're really excited to have, and we had to create our own thick mattresses and curtains for it as well to try to get it as interpretive as possible as we could. This is a picture of the attic before, not in the best condition. You can see some of the planks are not there. This luckily is in the area where you don't walk. This we actually ended up having to block, but we were able to add some interpretation there. The biggest thing about the attic, however, is that when you're first walking up there, you kind of look and you're like, I can see through the floorboards. That doesn't feel safe. And so our very first question when we were in the planning process was like, how much weight can we actually put up here? And the answer was not much. It was about 40 pounds per square foot of dead weight. And for live weight, it's about 12 people. So 12 adults. So that made trying to plan programming and exhibits very, very tricky. So it's a little bit more sparse up here. Due to that, but we wanted to talk about how children would have slept, and they would have often slept in the loft that would have been their second floor. And so we have remade nightgowns to kind of look like that. As well as we were actually able to put in one of the historic quilts that might have been used at the time. That was a Downers Grove quilt, and talk a little bit more about that architecture and the original chimney right there. Our last area, of course, our last floor is our basement. The biggest thing, if you look really closely, you'll notice what's really cool is the original house, due to it being from the 1840s, was a log foundation. And that log foundation was kind of one of our main showcases we wanted to show off. And you can even see it here. Doesn't even look the best, but it still looks cool. They were actually sitting when the house was on Randall. I believe their basement was only about 5 feet deep. Not very tall, not the biggest crawl space, and it was not the best floor. So when we wanted to move it, we decided, we have to build a whole new basement for it. why don't we use this space a little differently? So it became an area of where we can add temporary exhibit space, changing exhibits in here. This exhibit we have in here was on toys in Downers Grove and different toys they would have had. Then we've changed it to a music exhibit, and now currently it has an art exhibit of art that was found actually in the Blodgett house when they were doing construction on it. As well as it showcases our donation panel. We wanted to recognize all of those people who had donated to the museum, and working with our Downers Grove Heritage Preservation Corporation, came up with this large panel that we hope to improve upon eventually and add more interpretive panels here, more interpretive information, and use it for education. So we're still not quite there yet, but we're hoping to get some of that stuff there that we can continue with, but also then, of course, remember and recognize all those people who donated to our house. So this is what our museum campus looks like now. So the top is, of course, the whole scape of what our 4-acre property looks like, and then a little bit of each of our buildings. So now we have 3 buildings on site. Our first building, our Montreal Dedham History Center building, was built in the 1980s as a reconstruction of a carriage house. That is our main program space. But when the museum was first bought and purchased in the 1970s, it was our 2-story Victorian house. And now we were lucky to now have the addition of our 1846 Israel and Avis Blodgett house. So that's all for that.
Felicia, that is amazing. It's so funny because I know I can't speak for the awards committee, but I know getting to look through materials that get submitted by nominees, I feel like whenever we host these events, we get surprised by something that we learn, right? Like we just don't quite know the depth of this. But I've seen the comments in the chat, and I'm sure folks who are just enjoying learning more about what you changed there. You know what, like just rescuing this house and getting into the property is a feat in and of itself, but actually turning this into a space that you can use for a variety of purposes and interpret the way you want to is pretty amazing. And also, I'm very impressed that you built a whole basement for this thing, like, and that you thought ahead to think of to have temporary exhibit space. So anyway, I'm just wow. Congratulations again. I want to get into Q&A, but I would love for everybody to take a moment to just applause one more time now that we've gotten to see this lovely new, interpretive space you've created and made possible on your campus. So feel free to unmute, folks, and one more round of applause here for Downers Grove.
Well done, guys. Really good.
Awesome. All right. I want to jump into some questions. I want to invite those of you who are on today, feel free to drop questions into the chat and I'll fold them in. I've got a few questions myself to get us started. And I kind of want to go back to something Gordon said earlier, because, we're talking about this being a 15-year project, but he said, well, it even started before that. And I gotta know, like, what has kept all of you motivated for a project for this long? And I know you all worked on it at different points in time, but you've been cheering for this and the community's been cheering for this. What's keeping y'all and all of them motivated, or what was?
Well, I think a lot of people have grown up here in Downers Grove and seen changes in it that are not always preserving the things that they felt were important in the past. So there's been a growth of historic preservation support. We've had lecturers come in from outside the community, from Hinsdale. Gene Follett came in maybe 5 or 10 years before this house was saved and talked to us about what had been accomplished in Hinsdale with historic preservation. We have seen houses like the Edwards House, which was a really elegant end of the 19th century house, torn down to make room for condominium building on Maple Avenue. Maple Avenue has had this very historic feel, and given people a sense of pride in the community. When this opportunity arose, there were a lot of us who said, well, it's one of those unique opportunities that we're not going to let pass. And so the desire to preserve historic features in Downers Grove runs very deep with certain groups of people in the community, and it was not hard to mobilize them in this case. And fortunately, we had a receptive feeling on the part of the government agencies, both the village and the park district. And as Charlie Smart emphasizes, the main reason that this is so important is it was all accomplished with non-governmental funds at the beginning. The park district is now taking responsibility and operational funds for this, but most of the capital improvement funds are still coming from private donors like the Timken Foundation. And it is good that the state has contributed $135,000, but it's sort of the finishing touch. The private donations are why this actually succeeded. And that also is something that's very consistent with the attitudes in Downers Grove, that citizens feel that they should be doing things like this rather than asking their government to do them for them.
I love that it's a source of pride, and you see that in the funding, as you said. Thanks, Gordon. Felicia, Michelle, any comments on my question there?
Yeah, I mean, part of it is like I came into it, I feel like a little bit late because it was 2017. The house had just been sitting there. But I also feel like adding that house and being able to work on a house, like, so for one, it's not as a museum professional. It's not every day that you get, the opportunity to work on basically rebuilding a full museum exhibit from almost scratch. But also, like, even when I was originally starting and trying to share the story and the history of our homestead, that's a whole piece that was missing, like that we were just talking about, but being able to show people is kind of a great motivator just because of that, like being able to like show off this new piece of history.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. My next question for you all, and I know we've talked about this a bit, Felicia and Michelle, and planning for this event and getting to know you with this award. Can you talk a little bit about one or two roadblocks maybe that you encountered along the way, and then how you had to pivot or solve those?
Of course, our biggest one, of course, is COVID. We got the grant released to us in 2019, got the construction phase done in December of 2019, where we were kind of finally able to have a soft opening. We were really excited. We're like, oh, we'll get the exhibits done and we'll have an opening like mid 2020. We'll get this done quick. And then COVID hit and we just had nothing. It was at a standstill. We still hadn't gotten the house painted and I couldn't add exhibits until the house was painted. And it was like nothing was open. I had 0 staff. And also kind of like the money towards like getting the exhibits was kind of limited. They only kind of from the grant, they only asked about $30,000 for exhibits. And I was like, okay, 30,000, great. Where'd this number come from? Where's this supposed to go? And there was no answer. Nobody knew. I found out later that they were like, they just took a guess. And it's like, okay. So then it was a lot of kind of figuring out, okay, what can we do ourselves? I actually ended up all those curtains I made. So I just made simple curtains to protect, those walls, because we wanted to have blinds just to protect the natural light, but we wanted to have curtains in there. Curtains are expensive. So we just realized that fabric was like 1/10 of the price of unless from buying curtains. So something like that. So we had to find a private company for labels. We wrote our own labels, and then we found a company that could make them, that we worked with, that could find the labels that we wanted to make and make them for us. So it was a lot of like us just spending more time on and less money on getting things together.
And were those so you mentioned like some different people or companies you had to call on to help you out, maybe with a little unkind. Were those relationships that existed before you started working on this, or did you kind of establish those relationships when the need arose? Or I mean, basically, did you have to call on people to help you out? Like I can only imagine.
Yes, so we definitely had to. I just reached out to. I was like, all right, let me do some research on people who can do this type of signage, who can do like acrylic signage. Like, where can we do it? Called a couple of them in, tell them to look around, ask their opinions and price points, and see if they could do it. One company wasn't something they could do. Another one, he actually had an idea of what we were talking about, and it just happened to work out great. That he like happened to know exactly, and he didn't have it at his shop. It wasn't a regular thing, but he knew what we were talking about, and that's kind of why. And he was also a local business, so we were really excited to kind of be able to work with, locally as well.
So if you were to describe how big the team was, like how many people approximately did it take to just make this happen?
Ooh, a lot. So, I mean, it depends on certain stages. So, like from that whole grant perspective and writing the grant, I mean, it took multiple people from our park district and our higher ups, because that's not something like I had a part of, as like our planning board, our planning committee, working with our facilities person, because we actually have a facilities person that works with, that's the person you call if your light bulb's broken or your lock's broken. We have that person who to work with. We had a manager, a construction manager, and all the construction workers working. And then, of course, we actually do have a small staff at the museum. Just I'm the one full-time staff. I have a couple of part-time staff plus some temporary staff, temporary intern right now. So it's from writing the labels. It was me and my 2 part-time staff who wrote all the labels at the time. But then we have a little bit of staff turnover actually throughout that as well. And so we had a couple of them brought in. Yes, Gordon.
Yeah, I was going to mention that a little earlier in the process, there were some hiccups and roadblocks.
Oh yeah.
For example, this was a new adventure for the park district, and so we had to explain why this house was significant, and we had a group of volunteers who assembled the various information that we could find out about the relationship between the Blodgetts and abolitionist work, because we had in mind that one of the main points that would make this valuable to the community is if we could show that it represented the work of people who were on the Underground Railroad network and really participated in that abolitionist effort. So, and it isn't the sort of thing that people advertised at the time. It was breaking the law, and the penalties were quite severe. So we did find that the grandchild of the Avis, Israel, had written a very good story about what her parents had been doing as pioneers in Downers Grove. And then we have Henry Blodgett's memoirs also. And so there's a lot of contemporary documentation like that. Plus, we found some things in the local paper. And we compiled this and shared it with the park district and convinced them that this was really an important aspect of Downers Grove history. But still, having a new house that looked pretty disreputable on their beautiful museum campus didn't appeal to all the park district commissioners, but we had strong support. So the park district approved this move from the adjoining property back onto the museum campus, but they required us to set in escrow $50,000 just in case it wouldn't work out. So they'd have enough money to dig a hole and bury this house and get it off of the museum campus if it wouldn't work. Well, that $50,000 would have been very useful to us in paying for moves and painting, new siding, new roofing, all of that. And it was in escrow for quite a while, but eventually everyone saw that the house was going to be a success and the money was released. And so there were a lot of little hiccups like that along the way, and it took a good deal of stick-to-itness to reach the point where we could donate the house and a relatively finished state to the Park District. It was finished on the outside, but the inside still needed all this work that Felicia has been describing and led to the problems that she dealt with.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you brought up success. I think I'm just paying attention to the time here. So I do want to ask a couple questions before we go. One is related to some special recognition the house got recently. So Felicia, Michelle, you want to tell us what that was? What's this new status and recognition?
Yeah, sure. So we actually recently, as of April of 2023, were recognized as and accepted into the National Underground Railroad Network to Freedom, which kind of honors, preserves, and promotes that history of resistance to enslavement. And it's nation, really, it's nationwide. So there are about 700 Network to Freedom locations, and so we're listed as one of the sites, which means that we had enough history and research behind that Underground Railroad connection to kind of be added to that network. So we're really excited. We're part of the new passport program, so we're on their website. You can find our site on the National Underground Railroad Network.
That's awesome. And I know, obviously you went into this project with an intent on in adding to your programming, and you have. I don't know if you all want to fill us in on, kind of what's like big for you right now in terms of programming there, but then also what's coming, what's on the horizon with Blodgett.
Sure. Yeah, sure. So currently we've added kind of like a monthly just Underground Railroad connection tour, where we also kind of invite, like, from the stories that we know, we invite people to like kind of go on their own little stories and like read those stories that we have, as well as just give that history of that Underground Railroad connection to the house. We also wanted to keep that architecture and that unique architecture. So sometimes we just offer, this couple months ago, we offered an architecture house tour just to talk about that part of the house, as well as it's now been added on to our school and group tours that it wasn't added on. And then one thing that's kind of exciting that's upcoming that we're hoping is we actually were reached out to by a local film producer who's worked on a couple of other like short documentaries, and he wanted to kind of document for us and create a short documentary about, that house and that connection to the Underground Railroad, and now its addition to the network. So we're excited. He's working on it now, so it's not quite out yet, but we're really excited to kind of do that as well.
Awesome. That all sounds wonderful. We look forward to tracking what you all do next. And just excited to celebrate you in this project today, and then wish you the best of luck with all the rest. I want to offer a couple things first before we go today. I do want to make sure Felicia, Michelle, and Gordon, you stay on because I want to snap a quick photo of you in the Zoom from the event, and then I would love for everybody who's on to unmute one more time for one last round of applause as we wrap up this wonderful projects event, and then also our series of award events through this program. So please feel free to unmute and hoot and holler, use your reaction icons, and let's cheer one more time for Downers Grove Museum. Congratulations. Awesome. All right. We have recorded this event. We will be sharing it online on YouTube and with our membership soon. Thanks to everybody who joined us here. We hope you have a great holiday season and look forward to learning more about all of your projects maybe next year. Thanks, everybody.